Hey there, good people. Welcome to another episode of the Finnovator with me, Stuart Bell. I'm a business advisor working specifically with practice owners who want to build next generation practices. And in this episode, I wanted to share something which is decidedly old school and analog, not much to do with technology at all, but it's really, really important. And for me, revisiting this reminded me of some really key principles, whether I'm going down the route of trying to build strategic partnerships, whether I'm trying to build a really good digital marketing strategy, or whether I'm just trying to enjoy what I do more, and that's networking. A lot of people out there have strong opinions on how to do it and what it is, but when you look at the research into it, you uncover that networking has some very strong rules to play by. And that's what I cover off in this training, which is actually a pretty recent training module. The background is I was creating a series of modules around generating referrals from clients actively rather than waiting for them to come in, and how to form really strong strategic partnerships with other businesses and commercial entities who are going to refer through the kind of clients you want to work with. And I realized as I was putting together the training, there was a foundational piece. And that is those people out there who have strong professional networks tend to generate better results from these kind of efforts than those who don't. And it's true in social media as well. You tend to notice when someone posts something and it's useful, the propensity of those who have a strong relationship with that person to share, comment, like, and otherwise endorse their views on social media tends to lead to a bit of a snowballing situation. So I wanted to share this because regardless of what marketing you're doing, having a strong network is kind of a building block that most of us need. And I think one of the most famously quoted ideas around it is the idea that your network is your net wealth. And it's fairly true, regardless of whether you consider yourself an old school marketer or whether you're very firmly in the digital space. Having a good network professionally is wonderful, but also personally is also a really strong piece. So hopefully you get a lot out of this. A reminder, as always, there is more, much, much more. And in the last 12 months, we've launched our Practice Success portal with the intention of sharing a lot of the free content with people like you. I'd love you to be part of it. All you need to do is head over to our website, audere.com.au, audere.com.au. There should be a menu item there called Free Portal. Jump in, give us your details, and we'll have you on board in no time at all. That being said, let's jump in. Let's unpack what it takes to master the networking game. The background to this is the first part of this year has been for me all about kind of focusing on practice growth. And invariably, when you talk about practice growth, what you get is you get a focus on marketing to some degree. And so far, we've done marketing metrics, which is a really good module, I think, to run through from the beginning. I think last week or the week before, we did lead funnels, which is all about structuring the digital the right way. Elizabeth, welcome. It was all about structuring your digital correctly so you get traction in the way you want traction. And then over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to do one on partnerships, which I think is really, really key. And I'm also going to be doing one on active referrals, which is actually done. I've test run it with the WealthMed guys, and it's a very strong module. But there's this one in between, which is network mastery. And the reason why this is really, really key, I think, is because, to be frank, if you get the right network, everything else becomes a lot easier. When you have a strong network, it's much easier to get traction, particularly on social media, because you're going to have a bunch of people who share your stuff and are going to be actively engaging with it. It's much easier in partnerships. It's also easy to generate referrals that aren't necessarily just from client referrals. So this is kind of the raw material. And similarly, if you don't have a strong professional network, it means you won't be leveraging your skill, your activity as strongly as you can do. So we're going to jump in, and that's the question we're going to be asking today, which is how do you assess your quality of your network right now? And if you want to go down that route, build a stronger network. Now, I'm also mindful, if you're watching this, you might be someone who actually is pretty good at networking. And to be frank, if you built your business for a period of time, you're going to have skills in this space anyway. But nonetheless, I must admit, when I sat down to build this webinar and build it out and sort of update what we've got, I dived into quite a few books. And one of them that I've just finished reading is by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy, called Who Not How. And I think it's a really good reminder for me that sometimes the fastest way to achieve what you want isn't about you sitting down and doing the work, and isn't about what you can get done. It's often about finding the people who can help you do it or get ahead faster. And similarly, if you're going on a journey that you want to grow the business and you want to bring in the right kind of clients or better quality clients or whatever it might be, sometimes the best way is to go out there and look for the right people to connect with who can help you get there. Another one that I read, which has been really useful. It's funny enough, I bought this back in 2006 when I was still in corporate, and it's been sat there in the bookcase for a while. It's Jerry Gittimer's Little Black Book of Connections, and I was just going through it, and I realized it was a really good reminder for me of some of the things that I sometimes do really, really well, but sometimes you can lose sight of it and you forget to do these things. So if you're someone who does networking pretty well, this is going to be your opportunity to go through and kind of just refresh, make sure you're doing the things the right way, and optimize anything that could be done better, and maybe invest some more time, because I know the last 3 years, probably this is something that's dropped off people's list a bit. But I guess even if you have a business and you're already established, because networking tends to be something that's really important when you're growing your business, there may be a day where you bring on board someone who you want to be your next advisor. And of all of the most common issues that I find when businesses bring on board younger advisors who are potentially new to the game, one of the number one things that a lot of them struggle with is how to build that quality of network, because it's not something you need until you need it. And so for many of you, this will be an opportunity as well. When you do bring on board that person who you want to go out and start to generate sort of their own opportunities, this is the kind of thing that you can sort of help them with and make that, bridge that gap from just starting to out there and generating leads and generating opportunities much faster than it needs to be. But fundamentally, if we break it down, networking for me isn't necessarily about going out and shaking hands and kissing babies and handing out business cards and collecting business cards and pitching until you drop and all the rest of it. Although sometimes you will be pitching yourself. For me, one of the most, fundamentally, when you break it down, it's about connection. And I think for me, I tend to be a little bit more on the introverted side of things. To remind myself that's what it's about means that I find it much easier to sort of approach it. It's about connection. Frankly, it's often about listening. It's about learning from other people as well, which is a big one. But most importantly, it's about helping. So we're going to talk about how to assess what you've got in your network, but also how to approach this. And off the back of this, we've got a worksheet I'd love to work through with each of you so that you have a really clear plan of action on how to build this really strong professional network along the way. Does that sound good? Cool. There is a worksheet in the chat box. If you've got any questions along the way, please jump in and let me know. But let's get through it. So overview of the session. Now, funny enough, networking, I feel, is like one of those areas that people either love or they dislike it. And some people are just really, really good at it. And I think we all know people who just have it and talent for it. And then, we've got other people who would rather not do. For me, I find myself, I often go to, pay to go to the FBA events and whatnot. And I spend my whole time talking to 3 or 4 people because that's the kind of way that I connect with people. But I think the really important thing is, for me, when I approach network mastery, this isn't about meeting people. It's not just about meeting people. For me, it's about creating the framework and the conditions so you become the kind of person that people want to meet and they want to introduce other people to. And as I said at the beginning, if this sounds like referrals and partnerships, it is, but it is a difference, because both of the elements of referrals and partnerships that we'll cover in the coming weeks, that's about how to make it happen. But network mastery, as it says there, is about how is about creating the connections that make it possible. And the connection is the key thing. So the outcomes of the back of this is we're going to assess the quality of your network and understand really the role that you want it to play in your personal professional success, and get clear on what you could do to enhance it, not just over the next month or 2 months, but long term. We're also going to talk about how to approach forming those new connections, how to maintain existing ones. We'll talk about how important that is, and really decline as clearly as we can what you're seeking to achieve in building a really world-class network. And finally, we're going to actually identify those in your network who are your current network, and also work out how to invest time in building relationships with other people who you'd like to build relationships with. Cool. So for me, when I approach this network thing, I'm really wanting to ask this from 3 questions, and they are really networking mastery is about who do you know? Once you've identified who you know, it's how well are you connected with them? Are they the kind of people that you could call up and ask for advice or ask for an introduction? If not, then and you want it to be on that kind of footing, then potentially there's some work to be done. And equally importantly, who knows you? Reputation is a really good thing. And I guess when you look at digital has the benefit of enables you to put a lot of reputational things out there fairly easily, fairly cheaply, so people can get to know who you are faster. But ultimately, a lot of the connection, the fastest way to get connection is going to come through your network. Digital media is just a means of leveraging that, if that makes sense. Okay, what I want to give you is, it's not 11, it should be 7. It's 8 rules for connection. I think I've downloaded a slightly wrong preso, but anyway, we'll go with it. 8 rules for connection, and I'll just talk through them and then we'll get stuck into the doing. So the rule number 1, and I think this is a really good one, I took this from this book in particular, is I call it the doggy rule, which is whenever you're out networking, I think when I've seen it done really, really poorly, is people are going in there and they're just almost, not avert's the wrong word, but they're on the front foot. The first thing they're all about is what they can get out of the situation. And most people I know in that circumstance are going to be somewhat repelled by that, unless you're the person who's just going about it that by that motive as well. They're going to be repelled by it. And I think it's really important as you approach networking is park whatever motives you have for going to a networking or wanting to build relationships, and just be like a dog. Be friendly first, Dogs, I think, are some of the best creatures at making friends on the planet, because they tick all the boxes. They come up to you, they're smiling, they're friendly, they don't want anything, maybe a pat on the head, they're giving you eye contact all the way. I think it's a really good approach, and I think if you approach networking, when people approach networking with just the intention of going out there, being friendly, listening, learning, asking questions with no intentions and no baggage there, it tends to make the building of the relationship faster. It builds a foundation better, and it makes it more genuine. To that end, I think good advice as well is to approach this on an equal basis. If you approach a relationship from a deferential point of view, it's like working with clients. If you defer to clients and your view is that the client is always right and what they want they get, and your goal is to deliver what they need at any point in time, and they're always right, that's not advice. That's delivering service. And I think similarly, if you're approaching partnerships with the attitude of looking down on people, it's just not going to work. I think the really important thing is when you're in a relationship, even if you're overawed by people, go in there with the attitude of that you are a king dealing with a king or a queen dealing with a queen. I'll give you an example. I was recently introduced to a PR specialist. I really appreciate the introduction as well. And I was chatting with her on the phone, and the things she was saying to me about what she'd done, about the experience she'd had, about the business she'd built, I was like, wow, those are incredible skills. And I was a bit like, almost immediately, I was like, wow, I'd love to be able to leverage some of that. I'd love to be able to learn some of that. But then I sort of realized that, took a step back, and also realized that in order for this to work, I would have to approach it as if I had just as much value to give, rather than just go, wow, I defer to that. And I think this is really important. Sometimes as business owners, we can look at what other people do and their skill sets, and because they do things or have things, or they've achieved things that we haven't, we kind of measure ourselves against them as being lesser. And I think it's really important to recognize that you have as much value to add, different skill set, and finding that value is the key thing. And I think coming into this relationship with the attitude that it is equal is a much better way to move the relationship forward, rather than deferring to somebody, because people tend to work with people that they feel are at their level and they can add value. Otherwise, it becomes a mentor relationship rather than a partnership or a network thing. The third one, and I feel like talking about this is a little bit like teaching how to suck eggs, but the simplest way to sort of build that connection is find that common ground. And I remember when I was in MLC back in the day, we used to build out this thing called the advisor to client process. And it was kind of a step-by-step process, really high-level process, but how to deliver the new client experience. And when I came in, and we had a pre-existing model for it, and one of the things that they talk about doing in the first appointment is to be step 1, build rapport. And I feel like when you're kind of dealing with advisors, teaching them how to build rapport is kind of a bit insulting. So in saying, find common ground, I think most people out there are pretty good at finding common ground. But in case you're not, it's really about finding that thing that you can talk about that you got in common. And if you're talking to a business owner, well, business is going to be the thing you've got in common. We'll talk a little bit about partnerships in a few weeks' time. But as I said, a lot of people reach out, particularly via LinkedIn, and they lead with this is what I can do for you, or this is what I want from you. When in truth, the one thing we know about business people is that's what we've got in common. That's the common experience. As a result, it's very easy to start a conversation with other business owners if you focus on the topic of business, because that's the one thing you've got in common. So simple questions like, how did you get started in business? If you've ever asked that, it's a fantastic question to ask. It opens up a whole conversation. If you want to, where did you go to school is another one. And what made you become a business owner? Another really strong conversation starter and a great way to find that common ground. What did you do before you started your business? Always a great conversation. Again, really easy to find common ground in there. What do you do outside of work? What do you do for fun? What's been your biggest challenge over the past few years? Because I would suspect more times than not, you've got commonality there. And what marketing do you do? Is a really good conversation, because again, you can compare notes and push things like. Just out of interest, Simon, Elizabeth, are there any other questions that you guys commonly use when it comes to, finding common ground, or are there any techniques that you would personally recommend?
I would say that, we're, especially the guys, very casual, like, which pub do you drink at, or what footy team and stuff. I think the guys are very, very casual in that sort of, and they're very good at it too.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Simon and you're talking about Tyson and Brent and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Tyson will always talk about Collingwood and what music do people like first.
Do you know what? Football's a good one. Sport's a good one. Obviously, not everybody's into sport, but yeah, it's a good basis. I remember back in Hill Ross days, there was a guy called Keith Jones who was actually had a really interesting business model. He would go and buy other businesses, and then he would just every year he'd cull the bottom 20% of clients. In a very short space of time, he just built up this high net worth business because he was pretty ruthless about it. But Keith was actually from Liverpool. And when I first arrived, I went in there and I remember sort of thinking, where can I build a common ground here? So I was like, Keith, which football team do you support? Thinking he'd say Liverpool or Everton. And he just looked me dead in the eye and went, I don't like football. So sometimes it can work really, really well. Occasionally you get the outliers like the Liverpudlian who has no interest in football whatsoever. But yeah, football can be a good one. Elizabeth, how about you? You there?
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Busy, which is good.
Okay.
In ways, maybe. I tend to find something that someone said and go, look, I actually found that really interesting. And can you tell me some more about that? Or something like that, because there's usually something about someone that there's a particular point of interest as to why they might want to meet you or why you might want to meet them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's another good one actually, where if you've been introduced by a third party, how did you come to know Bill, or how did you come to know Barry? It's a great way of doing it. And then you can compare notes. Yeah, perfect. Love it. Cool. Let's crack on. Rule number 4 is actually it's a really, really good one. And I first sort of came across this as a technique or a methodology when I was listening to Tim Ferriss talk about how he prepared guests for his podcast. And as you guys know, I do the masterclass session. I haven't done it so much recently, but we're going to kickstart back into it. But we've done it quite a few times over the past few years. And generally, when I do the masterclass, I'll log in about half an hour before, and my guest in the day will also log in half an hour before. And the purpose of that is obviously to make sure that the text's working and all that's played. But another part of it is to get a bit of a warm-up conversation going, because then by the time you hit the actual live part of it, you're warmed up, you're into a rhythm, everybody's calm, everybody's sort of relaxed. And the technique he shared is he always, as part of that initial discussion, he'll always share something which makes him vulnerable. Something he's failed at, or something he's found hard. And the purpose of that, he found, is it puts the person he's interviewing at ease. And I think in a networking sense, being really open and somewhat like maybe even a little bit vulnerable is generally a good technique that's going to get you a better conversation, and generally in most cases is going to enable you to make a better connection. Because the other alternative is, we've all had that conversation with somebody who you're speaking, maybe a business owner you're speaking to, and the opposite is true. There's nothing wrong. Everything's perfect. There's no glitches. There's no errors. They're all shiny. And I don't know about you, but whenever I hear that, having worked with so many businesses, that's just not reality. That's not truth. I used to have a thing where when I get introduced to advisors, and sometimes I'd go and meet with them, And I had a general rule of thumb, which is if I met with an advisor in their business, it means that they enjoyed their business and they liked it. If I met with them outside their business, in a coffee shop around the corner, it generally meant that the office environment was toxic and they weren't enjoying it. But I remember sitting down with one advisor who specifically asked for the conversation. And the more we spoke about their business, I was just asking questions and you'd think there was nothing wrong. And it got to the point where I actually, about 20 minutes in, I was like, look, it seems like you don't need a business coach. I'm gonna leave you to it. It's good to meet you. And suddenly, next thing you know, it opened up. So I think going into this by being open and being willing to turn around and put it on the line and say, everything's not perfect, or I'm not at the level of success I want to be, and this is where I want to get to. It's okay to do that, as opposed to projecting the idea that everything's fine. The whole thing about fake it till you make it doesn't work anymore, simply because people, BS meters are quite strong, and it's really easy to go online and search and find out what people are and what they're not. Okay, rule number 5 is to be honest, prepare and expect to be judged. I remember Hermione came back, it was about 3 weeks ago, and we're having a conversation, and this thing that popped up about, she said that it's not fair to judge people. And I thought about that, and I was like, I got what she meant, which is it's not fair to it's not good to unfairly judge people on surface level things. But the idea of not judging people, for me, that doesn't make sense. Every minute of our life, we're making judgments about people and about the environment around us. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to survive. You make a judgment whether that person coming up the road towards you late at night with a baseball bat in your hand is going to be friendly or angry. You're making a judgment on whether or not you feel you can trust the person you're talking to. And I think if you go into networking prepared, if you want to work with specific people, you want to be part of a specific group, coming with value to add, understanding who's part of the group, and realizing that you are going to be judged based on your appearance, how you talk, whether you rock up early, whether you rock up late. I think it's much easier. And I mean, one of my bugbears is punctuality. I'm a real stickler for it. I think as my dad taught me a while ago, he said, lack of punctuality is sending out a message that other people's time is not important. I remember seeing recently, Mark McGowan, isn't it? He has a habit in WA of rocking up to press conferences, 30, 40 minutes late. And I just look at that and go, for me, that's a deal breaker. And there's going to be people out there who you might want to connect with. And if you're rocking up, ill prepared or ill matched, it's gonna just stop you from building that network. And generally, not always, but the more successful and senior and progressed the person is, the more there are going to be certain aspects of what you do that they're going to judge you on. Cool. Rule number 6 is really important, and I'm cut to the chase on this. This is about that moment where they ask the question, so what do you do? And being able to sort of explain what you do clearly and succinctly is kind of so important. So in a moment, we're going to go through an exercise, and I'm going to ask you to sort of explain to me that if you were meeting somebody for the first place or you're building a network, how you would introduce yourself. And I think there's 2 extremes here. You can go really long-winded and get really into the detail around it, and that's not going to work. If it takes you 5 minutes to explain what you're doing, you're using a lot of terminology, and you're diving deep into the all the different products you can recommend, the types of clients and the strategies, you're not going to get traction, particularly with people who don't necessarily have that level of insight. And similarly, I think if you're pulling out some catchphrase like "I'm the guru who helps people retire" or whatever it might be, similarly, that's not going to, for me, it's not going to work in a networking environment. So we'll talk a little bit about this, but if it's kind of a lot of this is drawing upon the work that most of you will have done on the 6-step value proposition and just condensing it down. But we'll talk about that more in a sec. 2 more rules. This is just a sort of an header. I've found that the higher you go in terms of seniority and connectedness and all of those aspects that you define people who can potentially open doors that you want opened, the more cautious those people are going to get. Did a session a few years ago called Gatekeeper, which I think is still on the portal member site, where we talked about having somebody who is essentially that first barrier between you and other people's demands on your time. Someone who can manage your calendar, make sure you're getting the right communications are getting through and the wrong ones aren't, and basically just ensure that you're focusing on the right things. And the more progressed somebody is, the more likely they are to have those kind of gatekeepers, and the more likely they are to have an eye out for people who want to come in and with motives to get what they want and not add value. So just a heads up, generally, the more the people that you want to connect with are able to open doors for you, the more important it is to kind of watch that rule one, which is clean your motives, park your motives at the door, and just focus on being friendly and adding value. Finally, rule number 8, and this is probably really one of the most important here, which is research has shown that once you build a network connection, staying in touch with that network, it matters way more than making the initial connection. And I've seen particularly younger advisors who will go through the process of building this network, and they'll invest the time, they'll go and meet, and they never follow through. And to be honest, it's one of the cardinal sins, which is saying you're going to do something or building the relationship and just not delivering on the end of it. So it's a thing to really watch out for if you're focusing on building that network. Just want to check in. Simon, Elizabeth, what's been most useful so far? What's really connecting with you of those rules of connection? Is there anything you'd add? Is there anything that's kind of triggered you? Simon?
I'd say the last one, actually. That's a very good point, that it's not about just the initial meeting. It's delivering and being there, and just like, I think you've mentioned this in other bits and pieces as well, just always being on someone's mind. Like if you're not actually making a touch point, they're gonna forget about you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the only time that you're reaching out and making contact to somebody is when you want something. You create kind of a negative feedback loop, if you know what I mean. It means that, you know what, I'm hearing from Simon again. What does he want this time? As opposed to building the relationship, which is not the case, Simon. Elizabeth, what about you?
Yeah, number 8's the same. I mean, I think that's really important as well, because I remember thinking, you mean I have to keep talking to them? Really? Oh, you mean,
yep.
So, and I just think that was a really sort of big learning for me.
Yeah. It's like building the connection is the start of it, right? And it's what you do after that indicates whether or not the relationship's going to progress. Okay, let's get stuck into some doing. And first thing I wanted to do is do a bit of a self-assessment. So I'm going to give you a bit of time to do this, because I'd love you to go through this and then sort of feedback to me on where you're at and how good you feel you are. And it's just about going through. There's 15 questions, and really it's about marking yourself on a score of 1 to 5, with 5 being that, you know, this statement is absolutely true for you, and 1 being, no, that's just not the case. So go through, Mark. I'm going to run through them one by one, but I'd love you guys to sort of mark, and at the end of it, give me a sense of where you think you're at. Number 1, people find it easy to like me. Likability, there's a lot of research that's been done on likability, and it is a major factor in your ability to network and open doors. You got to look at sort of acting, for example. One of the most significant factors in many actors' success is, are they likable, both in terms of likable to the audience and obviously in the relationships they build and how they work with people. Keanu Reeves, classic example. George Clooney is another one who is highly likable. Yeah, there's many. Chris Pratt. So if people find it very easy to like you, put a 5. If people's natural reaction to you is to, run screaming from the room, maybe more of a 1. If you frequently meet new people, obviously it's going to make it easier for you to build a network. So 5 being, if that's perfectly true. If you very rarely meet new people, that might be an area to focus on. When you meet new people, you can engage quickly and easily. Some people are very, very good at it naturally. Some people have to work at it. Again, 5, if this is true for you. If you can introduce yourself confidently and in a way that moves the conversation forward. This is down to that rule number 6, which is being able to communicate you really, really clearly in a way that invites further conversation. 5, if you're good at this. 1, if you're not. I find myself helping people, ideally non-clients, frequently. It's usually a good indicator that you have an active network. I actively seek new connections on a regular basis. Again, 5 if this is true for you. 1 if it's not. 3 if some so. You undertake activities, networking activities, at least 5 hours a week. And I sort of define network activities very broadly here. If you have a activity where you are reaching out to people you have a connection with, having a conversation, or reaching out and trying to build new connections, that to me is networking. That is a network activity. Again, 5 if you do at least 5 hours a week, all the way back down to 1 if you just don't do any. It's easy to find information about me and what I do online. I think most people on the program would be at least a 3 on this, if not higher. Essentially, if you've got a website, that talks about what you do and blogs and maybe even some videos out there, you're a 5. For example, I'd imagine, Elizabeth, you're easily a 5 on this. I've been published. Again, if you've published a book or you've published something out there, maybe you're published in newspapers or you're been published in other people's blogs or whatever, or been interviewed, you'd put a score in here. If you've got a book, you go all the way 5. You take part in peer groups and other opportunities to present to other people, like speaking. Again, if you're in front of groups of peers and getting on stage and talking about what you do, whether it's an actual stage or a virtual stage, it's going to be much easier to build that network. Speaking in particular is a great way to do that. I know who the most prominent people in my immediate community, who they are. And when I say immediate community, I mean clients, local area. If you've got a niche like ethical investing, that might be prominent people. And again, 12, if the most prominent people in your immediate community know who you are. Again, 5 if that's true, 1 if it's not true. I know who the most prominent people in my field are. And this is broad. If the communities, your immediate connections, the field for me would be, if you're a marketer, you'd know who the most prominent marketers in your area of marketing. If you're in Elizabeth, it would be, do you know who the most prominent ethical advisors are in the industry? Simon, it would be, for example, do you know who the most prominent people in what you do and in the operational sense are? And similarly, do they know who you are? And finally, do people engage you in order to facilitate introductions to others? This happens all the time. It's usually a good indication that you may actually be at the center, a center of a really strong network. But if it doesn't happen at all, then it might be an indicator that you're a little bit disconnected. Does that make sense so far? Just going to grab a quick glug of water. How are we going? Simon?
Scored pretty low.
How'd you go? What was your score?
Look, the meeting people and being upfront is kind of fine, but I think when it comes to the things like how much do I connect and where I am in the actual field, that's probably a bit low. We don't really do much. Well, I don't in particular. Okay. The guys might, but not me necessarily.
And it's to be one of the things about this is not about me going, you have to be a super networker. It's really about you deciding how much of a role you want networking to play in your success or what you're doing. And we'll talk about what this can look like in a second. But I guess the point of this is just to go through early on and understand, where am I at now? And if you're happy with where you're at, that's totally fine. But if you identify, okay, there's some areas that I probably could do more, then focus on 1 or 2 and say, okay, I'm gonna improve my network in that area, if that makes sense. Elizabeth, how about you? How'd you get on?
I think I got strong with opportunity to improve further.
Yeah.
Because,
what were you strongest at?
It's easy for people to find information about me when I do online. I take part in peer groups and present to other people. I know who people in my field are. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where you're strongest.
Yeah, but I'm sort of going, you really want to talk to me? Really? So I'm just, I'm in a state of disbelief, basically. Is that
disbelief?
Really, yeah. I was at something the other day and people were wanting to introduce me to other people and thinking, really? How come? Yeah.
I still love that this is a surprise to you, because I've been working with you for a while, and I know that you know a lot about your chosen area, and you have some strong views. And I also know that you're extremely personable. So I'm let's just put it this way, I'm less surprised than you are.
Okay, all right.
But it's kind of good to know. And obviously, sorry.
Maybe we need to do some work on that. Do you know? I'm thinking that I think that these people are really interesting, and you actually really want to talk to me, really. So it's just that's my connection point. Really.
Have you heard of imposter syndrome?
No, I don't think I'm an imposter.
I don't think I'm an imposter, but it's a common thing. Whereas people kind of, I think it's an extreme thing, but I think it's a natural, and it's probably well adjusted in order to, I wouldn't say have doubt, but be a little bit surprised every now and again that you are held as in high regard as you are. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a bit of an assessment. And I guess beyond that, if you've identified 1 or 2 areas, it's kind of a question about how you do it. And for me, one of the key elements to this, and I'm going to cover this when we do active referrals in a couple of weeks, comes from the book Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, which is a great book, which is all about, if you've read it, you'll know what it's about. If not, it's about how trends start, how things get traction, how they, how hush puppies became the coolest thing on the world, how Tamagotchi became huge around the world. And there's so many fascinating case studies in there. But one of the case studies they always point to is a case study where they were able to identify that it was actually a study to understand how many degrees of separation there are between complete strangers. And the answer is 5.3. You're pretty much connected to everybody in the world by 5 degrees rather than 7. But one of the experiments they did is they got 32 letters, and they started in New York at one of the offices there. And the idea was they had to get those letters across the whole country to Los Angeles, but it couldn't be done in the post. It had to be done by handing from person to person. And when the letters were passed on, the person who was given the letter would write their name on it, and then so on. And that's how they tracked the degrees of separation, how many hands it went through to get to the contact in Los Angeles. But one of the most interesting findings that came out of it was 15 or 17 of the letters went through the same tailor in Chicago. And what they identified out of that is that when you look at social cohesion, social networks, they're not connected equally. There are certain people who tend to be at the center of connecting not just networks of people, but networks of people. And they tend to be people who are highly social. They tend to be people who meet a lot of people on a regular basis. They tend to be people who sort of they bridge different socioeconomic divides. They work with people with various different jobs and industries, which you'd imagine if they're a tailor and they've been around for a while, they'd be doing exactly that. And what they identified is that these people are super connectors. They're people who, by way of that attribute, those attributes, are able to bring a lot of people together. And if you want to put this to work, make a list of your 10 closest friends, and then in the next column, write down who made the introduction. And you'll very quickly start to notice the people who are connectors in your network. And if you don't notice any connectors for you, you're probably the connector. And I think at the core of this, it's a really useful sort of thing to know about when you're going out there and trying to build a network, because if you can help to connect people, you're going to expand your network. But equally, if you can focus on building relationships with people who are connected or are super connectors, not only are you going to get more traction with it, but the chances are that you yourself are probably going to build a stronger, wider network more quickly. So the blueprint is really, really simple. And I want to run through this with each of you, and I'd love to get your feedback on it. The first one is I just want you to make a list right here of what are you aiming to achieve by improving your network. And I've made a couple of lists. I've listed a couple of options in there. Sometimes for some people, building a stronger network is about gaining access to certain skills or being able to learn certain things from other people. Opportunity is another one that comes up for being able to get the opportunity. At the moment, I'm working to build a bit of a network in the US, because I want to be able to go out to the US and do a little bit of what I do here over there. So that's why I'm building those relationships over there. Is there a specific connection you want to make? Is there somebody in a specific position or who has a specific skill set or does a specific role or works for a specific company or anything of that specific that you want to work? In other words, do you have a clear target that you want to reach? Is it about your personal progression? Is there something that you want to improve or you want to get ahead sooner? Is it a status thing? You want to get access to social networks that you don't currently have access to? Is it you want to get access to someone who can give you advice on certain topics or certain elements? Is there a financial aspect to it? You want to access a network that's going to enable you to grow the business in a certain way. Maybe you want to work with clients who meet a specific profile, or maybe it's about generating different kind of revenue. Is it about getting certain introductions from people in your network to others, or is it just being able to get access to certain things or certain people? Simon?
Yeah, for me, I would say there's two parts to it. There's a business part and a personal part, because I don't do the actual advice. But on a personal side, I think what you said about introduction to people that could be a helpful resource for advice would be pretty good. Because me being a bit of a jack of all trades, I don't kind of have that high level of knowledge in some things I kind of need. So always having someone to refer to or I can ask a question to would be super useful.
So the one of the things that whether you do this now or you do this later is okay, but being specific is useful. It's like, if you're going out and you're trying to attract certain clients in your business, being very, very clear about who they are. So when you talk about building certain skills or having someone to bounce some ideas off, specifically, what does that person have that you feel that you would benefit from, or you personally don't have?
Oh, so well, for instance, the fact that you got me onto that SEO course, so I wouldn't have had a clue. So having someone obviously like yourself to put me in the right directions for where I could learn more, or who actually can actually maybe teach me and stuff is quite a good thing. I wouldn't have known to go to ClickMinded. I probably would have done some other cheap, nasty SEO course, and probably not got as much out of it.
You know what? We should probably do a bit of a webinar where you can walk through what you learnt from the SEO course, because I think that'd be really useful to sort of share some of your knowledge.
Well, it was probably a good 20-hour course. Like I can hopefully break it down to about an hour of the useful stuff.
I love it. Let's do that. We can maybe do a masterclass on that. But yeah, that's a really good example of kind of when I mentioned this book at the beginning, it's about the who, not how. And sometimes, in that case, if you'd have gone down the route of just going, okay, I'm going to do SEO, you would have gone out there and just kind of got stuck into whatever you needed and probably paid a fortune for it. But because your first inclination would go, okay, who can I ask about this? You ended up getting access to, I think, it's a pretty good it's a high quality course, and there wasn't any financial outlay. So it kind of worked out well.
Yep.
Elizabeth, how about you? What do you see as the main benefit for you of having a strong or stronger network?
I'd like to build the business more, but it has to be the way that I want it. As I am getting out and meeting more people, it seems to be that that's not such a strange idea after all.
So the people you're talking to are other business owners?
Other business people, especially in the Ethical Advisors Co-op, which I'm becoming more active in. And I mean, the idea of actually helping people identify what their values are and working with them through what they're wanting from their money to help them in a sort of fairly true sense is, I'm getting support for that in ways that I hadn't expected, which is that absolutely doing the right thing by people is absolutely important. And I'm getting validation for that, I suppose.
Validation, yeah.
Is that
That's what I'm hearing. It's like it's that whole thing about you are the sum of your 5 closest friends. It's if you surround yourself with people who are doing similar things to you and they're doing the right thing, and it's going to give you more confidence that the approach that you're taking is the right one. Correct?
I think that it's not the confidence that the approach I'm taking is right. It's that this is a way of growing a business as well as looking at just the financial outcomes of what happens in the business. It's a different way of, it's not different. It's just that it's really important as well. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if you are clear about what you're going to get from it, then it gives you a bit of sense of what you're going to aim at. The next thing I think I'd like to just run through is, how are you going to introduce yourself? It comes up in conversation. How can you succinctly explain yourself and what you do? So mine would be, I'm a business coach. I work with financial advisors, accountants, and mortgage brokers, and I've got a bit of an interest in combining the tech startup world with practice management to help advisors get ahead. That's probably how I would position what I do. It's like, this is what I do, this is who I do it for, and this is what it is about the way that I do it that is different or unique. That makes sense? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes or a minute just to kind of scribble some ideas. You might already have this, in which case just let me know and share what you've got. But if you're going to communicate what you do or how you do it, or in really succinctly in a way that people are going to go, oh, okay, I get that, and potentially move the conversation, how would you approach it? What's the wording you would use? give you a little bit of time, and then when you're ready, just pop your hand up and let me know.
I could probably start a little bit.
Yeah. So Simon, we're having a, I don't know, we're at a conference and I go, Simon, what do you do?
We role play here, or I'll just okay. Well, I currently I'm doing operations and management for a financial group, small company. But I used to actually be a graphic designer, so I actually come from quite a field of communication and design and stuff. So, but now I do a little bit of everything, which is why I kind of do the operations, marketing, and just a bit of a jack of all trades. Specifically, I do love learning and I do love tech, so that's where I probably cover quite a big field, and it kind of suits my style for small business. Where I can cover a lot of area rather than one specific. That's kind of it.
Okay. I think it's good, but I do think you're underplaying yourself a little bit. If I was approaching it, I said, look, I kind of play a role for a financial planning business based outside of Melbourne, and I got a combined role. I'm kind of look after their marketing. I've got a bit of a background in graphic design and technology. I also am deeply involved in managing the back office and making sure everything gets done. As well as I get strongly involved in sort of helping implement projects. So I'm kind of at the engine room, and I work across the three areas of the business, which are broking, accounting, and financial planning, to make sure we're bringing on board clients and the business is operating in the background.
I'm gonna tell the boys that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, because don't forget, we mentioned remember at the beginning, it's about getting the balance right between meeting as equals. And look, it's not saying that there's anything wrong with being a jack of all trades, but I think to flip it around, I think you've got a skill set which is not
that
hugely common.
Bit.
Sorry,
I like the engine room bit. It's kind of like it's probably an easier way to explain it.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you do a lot of the marketing, you drive a lot of that stuff, I think it shouldn't be underplayed. I mean, that's a skill set that if you're speaking to another business owner who maybe that's not their skill set. Maybe they're not very good at marketing, and maybe they're not that good at the operational side of things. That's going to be an area that they'd be really interested to talk to you about. That makes sense?
Yep.
Elizabeth, how about you?
Yeah, microphone. Okay, so I'm a small business owner working in financial planning and advice. And we work with people to see how we can help them get to where they're wanting to be financially and as part of their lifestyle. And I have a strong interest in ethical and sustainable investing and answering people's questions about how to use that to get to where they want to go.
How would you explain, in a sentence or two, the difference between what you do in the ethical space to what most people's perception of advice would be? You there?
Yeah, I'm just thinking. It's a deep and meaningful question. I think that most people's perceptions of advice is the financial part, but I work with people to understand what's important to them and how using their finances to help them get there is where we're coming from. I mean,
So what is it about ethical that makes it different?
Ethical isn't a one-stop shop. It's a different thing for different people. And the issue about ethical and most financial advice is that ethical takes on a whole lot of different colours, and you need to drill down to find out what the ethical part of it actually means to them. And if there's something in the financial world that can help them to get there using that particular framework.
But so I don't want to paraphrase, but I provide advice, but you provide advice to people who they have a certain moral code, and they want that moral code to apply to the way that they invest money, build wealth, and ultimately contribute to the great, I don't want to use the greater good, but you get the sense, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I think for me, and like not the most important thing. I mean, is to really be able to communicate very clearly what it is about, not just the process, but what it is about the people you work for and why they come to you rather than go and work with somebody who doesn't have that focus. That's the thing that for me would open a conversation and move
About,
it forward.
yeah.
Yeah.
About
Because ethical as a word, it can mean a lot. You're right. It can mean a lot of things to different people, but ultimately it's about people who care about what
people who care. That's right.
Yeah, people who care more about what happens to at the end of their to what happens with the money they invest and whether it's being used for purposes they agree with. Is that fair?
Yep.
Cool. The next bit is something that you can either have a crack at now, or alternatively, you can take it offline. But it's really, this is the foundation of this. And there's two lists in front of us that we're going to make. And the idea once we've made these lists is every week, your goal is to reach out and build connection and progress the conversation or the relationship or help in some way the people on this list with the purpose of building a strong relationship. And there's two kinds in there. There's the first one is your connection list. And typically this is going to be anyone that you already have a strong relationship with, maybe someone who has made introductions in the past, maybe someone who's referred, someone who you enjoy meeting with, they enjoy meeting with you. They can facilitate some of the outcomes. They can help you find new skills. They can open up new opportunities, make introductions. Ideally, I'd like you to make a list of at least 10, but ideally 20 of these people. Some of them may be clients. Some of them may be people that you've known for a long, long time, people you worked with. Some of them may be other business owners. Some of them may be friends, family, colleagues, whatever it is. But when you got that list, one of the things I've started doing more and more recently, particularly now that we're definitely out of this 3-year lull that COVID was, is making a habit of every week picking 2 or 3 people off my connection list and just reaching out to them. Does that make sense? Cool. The next list as well over there is, again, I'd love you to make sort of 10 or possibly a minimum of 10, up to 20 people that you potentially don't have a strong connection with, but you'd like to build a connection. Now, this can actually be specific individuals. And sometimes these can be people that you have in your network, but you haven't really worked. You haven't really invested the time or things have kind of drifted away or, things got busy and you go, you know what, I want to reestablish this. Alternatively, this might not be a specific person. It might be a person in a role or a person with a skill set. And part of your job will be to go out there and find where that person is. For example, one of the things I want to do is I want to build a relationship with people in the financial services industry in the UK and in the US, because I want to learn more about it. That's kind of one of my focuses. And so I've identified Alan Smith, who's an advisor I've known for ages over in the UK. And I started reaching out to him, an old friend of mine, Ian, who's based over in the US, who works in financial services. I'm reaching out and starting the conversation, not with the motive of necessarily getting something to happen straight away, but building that connection so it's moving in a direction that I'd like to explore. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So is this something, do you want me to give you some time to do this right now, or is it something each of you would like to take offline? And I'll maybe circle back in about a week's time and find out where you got to in terms of your numbers. Elizabeth, is this something you'd like some time to do now, or you want to take some time to think about it?
Sorry. I can take it offline, but I'm just thinking that there was someone who I met in Australia who lives in New Zealand, and I have a client who's moving back to New Zealand, and I was having some trouble figuring out how part of their system worked. And I just talked to him, and he just reached out to me right away and gave me the answers that I wanted really, really fast. And it was just so nice. And yeah.
That sounds perfect. And you never know, right? You reestablish these connections and love it. And Simon, how about you? Sorry, keep going.
So he's going to look after this client when they move back to New Zealand, and this person's an ethical and sustainable investing type person. He went, I have this person who's moving over, and can I introduce you to them when they move to Australia? I went, yeah, sure, fine. I mean, that wasn't part of the deal, but it just happened. Do you know what I mean? It was just, it was just so sincere from his side. It was really lovely. Yeah.
Perfect. That sounds like a really good relationship, just to focus on building and see where it goes, see what happens with no expectation. Simon, how about you?
I'm happy to take it offline and maybe even talk to the guys. Okay. What was the main difference between the connection list and the nurture list?
Connection are people that you already have a relationship with.
Okay, yeah.
And it's really about just making sure that you maintain the relationship.
All right.
You don't let it drift. Whereas nurture are people that either you may have had a relationship with, but it's kind of drifted a bit, or people you'd like, specific people you'd like to have in your network, or alternatively, the kind of person that you'd like to have in your network, but you've got to go out and look for them.
All right.
So, for example, one of the people I identified is a lovely lady called Kiri Priao, who used to be one of the PDMs at AMP, and then she moved overseas to Switzerland. And I just realized as I went through this process, I was like, I used to love working with Kiri, and she's a super smart lady, also very social, but just lovely to deal with. And I was like, you know what? She's going on my nurture list. And sure enough, I texted her I messaged her on Instagram yesterday, and she's come right back. So that's an example of someone who would be on my nurture list. And I'm the goal of just seeing if, reestablishing the relationship and working out whether or not she would be someone that I would potentially move onto the connection list and just maintain regular contact with and see where it goes. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So Simon, you're gonna have a crack at this with the guys, and we'll circle back and check in about it next week. Is that right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Love it. Cool. So that's pretty much what I want to cover off today. There's one bonus strategy I did want to mention, and I think it's a really, really good one if done correctly. And that is to potentially look at facilitating a really intimate business networking group. Now, when I mention this, I'm not going near BNI or anything like that. Personally, I'm not a fan of BNI. I know it works really, really well for some people, but if I was being facetious about it, I say BNI is the penalty you pay for not being good at marketing. But what I'm talking about, and I've seen it done a few times, which is you get 3 or 4 or 5 business people who have similar interests, but they're not necessarily in competition. And just every month you come together. You just chat, you meet for an hour or so, or maybe meet over lunch. Ideally not in a restaurant. You want to do it in a work environment, but you can grab some food. Potentially, the way I've seen it run really well is each month it's someone's job, it's someone's opportunity to sort of present to the rest of the group on something that's going on in their business, something they've done. You can run them as a mastermind where everybody comes in and they sort of put a question. I want to get some feedback on this, and everybody gives feedback. But they work really, really well. And if you're looking to build a really strong network and do it at scale, where you've got 5 people in the room and you're doing it collectively and you're building those connections, it's a really, really good way to do that. So I wanted to put it out there because particularly now we're out of lockdown, out of COVID, but I think people are starting to get more and more comfortable with doing it. This is a great way of doing it. And again, keep it small, get everybody to commit to it, and make sure you've got people in the room who get along. They're going to be on the same wavelength. They're going to be the same vibe. And other structure of these is everybody comes along and presents. They take their turn month after month, or you run it as a mastermind. Or even, you can every now and again get an external person to come in, like a business coach or a marketing person or whatever, and they just kind of run through a session, an informal sort of discussion session rather than a formal presentation. Really good way of doing it. A really good way of taking what we've spoken about networking and just giving it that bit of scale, and also creating those connections between not just you, but between each other as well. And again, often these kind of thing, if you get the right people in the room, can naturally evolve into a partnership. So hopefully that's useful. I think we covered off the action elements. The final question for me is really, what are you willing to do to build a world-class network? And this is partly a time question, because ultimately, if you want to make this part of what you do, if you see value in creating that work, and personally I do, I think the more and more I've thought about this in the lead up to delivering this, the more and more I've realized that the last 3 years, because of everything that's happened, I think maybe some of us have allowed some of this networking stuff, and I'm speaking for myself here, to kind of drift. But I honestly think that in many, many cases, one of the fastest ways to get to where you want to in business is going to be measured by who you have the ability to draw upon, whether it's for advice or introductions or opportunities. And in many cases, it comes down to this. It's before you sort of start asking, how do I do this? Sometimes the best option is to go, well, who could I engage with? And specifically, if you've got a really strong network, that makes the who question a lot easier to answer. So for me, this question is all about if you were going to make networking something that you did consistently and building that network, what would you be required to do? How much time would you commit to it? Is it something that on a weekly basis you would sit down as part of your planning, grab your list and go, okay, I've got my 20 connections. I've got my 20. Who am I going to speak to? Who am I going to connect with? Who am I going to send something to? Who am I going to meet with? Who am I going to reach out to? If you're willing to do that for 5 hours a week, whether it's an hour a day or whatever it is, and have a system for tracking it consistently, the speed at which you'll grow that network and be able to leverage it it'll be incredibly quick. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. That's all I wanted to cover, boys and girls, ladies and gents. Is there anything additional that you wanted to? I got your message, by the way, Elizabeth. SEO does sound good, so I might chat to you about that, Simon, and see if you're up for it. But yeah, anything else you wanted to cover? Any questions, queries?